So we're looking at Pennsylvania's burglary statute. And in some ways, this statute is unnecessarily complicated. But that's something we've seen with a lot of Pennsylvania criminal statutes. Let me share my screen, and we're going to talk about this statute. So if you look at this, we have the offenses that are defined, and under prong 1, under A, we have two separate provisions that seem to say the same thing. If you go into a building or occupied structure or separate portion thereof. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's say you go into a house and there's a garage, and that garage is separate, has a separate lock to it. Or a person has like an office within their home and it's separately locked. That would be a separate portion of a structure or occupied structure, a building or occupied structure. When you look at prongs 1 and 2, they say if you go into one of these things with the intent to commit a crime, under prong 2, if you go into one with the intent to commit a crime, not a felony or misdemeanor, but a crime, then you are guilty of burglary. Prong 1 says if you go into one of these things with the intent of committing a crime, and then actually either commit, attempt, or threaten to commit a bodily injury crime therein, then you are guilty of burglary. Well, prong 1 requires a lot more than prong 2. And we don't see anywhere in these notes that prong 1 is graded any differently. Now, we could easily imagine that in the sentencing guidelines that they're broken out separately, but you wouldn't need to break it out separately in the statute to then have differentiations in sentencing. This is clunky drafting. But then let's move into 2, 3, and 4. 2 says if you enter a building or occupied structure that is adapted for overnight accommodation and no one is there. So what does that mean? Well, that means that, well, first of all, occupied structure clearly doesn't mean presently occupied because it says no one is present. So in this instance, if the neighbors go on vacation and you go into their house with the intention of stealing a Swiss Army knife, for instance, then you are guilty of burglary, even though no one was there. And prong 2 version of burglary. Prong 3, you enter into a building, occupied structure, or separately secured or occupied portion thereof. Again, the house itself or some subcomponent of it, or a boarding house. Like there used to be these boarding houses or hotels. A hotel room would be an example. Hotel rooms have separate locks. So if you enter into a building or occupied structure that is not adapted for overnight accommodations, so in a gas station. A gas station is not where you expect anyone to sleep, and it's not really set up for that. But what if the clerk decided to spend the night there because there was a hurricane, or in, like, say, the Texas energy crisis, that the power went out and it was really cold, but there was power at the gas station, so he brought his cot there. You violated prong 3 if you go into the gas station to take money out of it, to steal from it. Under prong 3, if someone is there sleeping on a cot, even though it's not designed for overnight accommodations. Under prong 4, if you go into a building or structure like a gas station that's not designed for overnight accommodations and no one is there, then you violated prong 4. Well, why do we care? What's the difference between prong 3 and prong 4? Well, then when we get down to the grading of this particular type of homicide, we discover, and this is even kind of clunkily written, but we discover that, except as provided in paragraph 2, burglary is first degree. Then we come down to paragraph 2, and we discover that under 2 little I, except as provided in subparagraph little 2I, that section A4 above is second degree. So, we go back up to that provision. You break into the gas station, No one's there. It's not adapted for overnight accommodations. No one's there, and you wouldn't expect anyone to be there. Class 2 felony. You break into a place that is adapted for overnight accommodations. You go into the neighbor's house while they're on vacation, or you come into the 7-Eleven and someone happens to be there unexpectedly. Both of those would be class 1 felonies. So this is not a model of clear, neat, streamlined drafting. But what you see is that unlawful entry is required, entry is required with the intent to commit a crime, and it has to actually be unlawful entry. Let me take you back to that. I spoke ahead. Take you back to the statute. If we look down here to defenses, it is a defense that the structure was abandoned or that the premises were open to the public. So if you go into the 7-Eleven to steal a candy bar, you're not guilty of burglary because the 7-Eleven was generally open. If you go into the 7-Eleven after hours, then you have entered into a building with the intent to commit a crime for which you do not have the defense that the premises were open to the public or that you were licensed or privileged to enter. So if you were a guest at someone's house, then you're licensed to enter the house. So that's burglary in a nutshell. This is one of those you might want to go back and look at again or just read over. It's not terribly complicated. It's complexly worded, but the concept is basically this. You go into a building planning to commit a crime, and that will be the crime of burglary, unless the building was open to the public, you had a unique privilege to enter, or the thing that we're talking about was abandoned. So that is, and then there's some complexities with grading, namely whether this is a building we'd never expect anyone to be there, and in fact, no one is there, or everything else. For everything else, class 1, really serious crime, class 1 felony, versus class 2, which is a very serious felony. This is the level of sexual assault. That going into a building like an unoccupied gas station is still a class 2 felony. Everything else, though, with burglary is class 1. Some of the most serious crimes that we have outside of first-degree murder. So that's burglary in a nutshell.